Thank you everyone for coming. We're so excited to have all of you here tonight. Tonight's meeting is really special. Tonight we have an all-youth panel focused on sharing about a bill that is working its way through the legislature that centers climate justice education. This bill is for youth and it's written by youth. And tonight we're going to hear from some of the teenagers who've been involved in working on this bill. My name is Laura Gardner. My pronouns are she, her, and I am co-chair of Climate Reality, Massachusetts South Coast. Thank you to our co-hosts, Citizens Climate Lobby, Our Climate, and the Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition. Just housekeeping, we are going to ask that you put any questions in the chat, and we will try to make time for questions at the end. But we're just going to go ahead and kick it off and let our three speakers, our three youth panelists, introduce themselves. So if each of you can share who you are and how you first got involved in climate justice education.
Great. So I can start. My name is Jonathan Lan. I am a senior at Weston High School in Massachusetts. And I first really got involved in this idea of climate education in order because I was I gained climate education outside of school. So throughout my years of schooling, I really didn't really learn anything about climate change or anything about the solution or the things that I could do to do anything about it. And so once I joined Our Climate and once I really got involved in this climate organizing space, I gained the tools to actually take action upon the thing that I'd cared about for all my life. And so that's why I care. That's why I want to bring these same tools to everyone like me, who cares deeply about climate change, but doesn't know how or doesn't know where to go to do things about it.
I can go next. My name is Anaya Raikar. I'm a junior at the Windsor School in Boston, and I live in Brookline. I use her pronouns. Growing up in school, I had a very elementary education around climate change. I knew that it existed. I didn't really know what I could do about it. So until I got into high school and I joined Our Climate, I didn't really have knowledge of what I could do to support the climate crisis. But now that I'm in this amazing space with all these other youth who care about climate change and want to provide climate education, I am very optimistic to see what we can do in Massachusetts.
Awesome. I'm Sarah. I am she, her pronouns. I'm a junior at Acton-Boxborough Regional High School. I think I don't actually have a super straightforward answer to this, to be honest. I think to some extent, I'm just here. And that's great and that's awesome. I first got involved kind of at the local level, working on local policy, and then I was a fellow with Our Climate last year, where I got to kind of take a lot of the work of this bill and be really deeply involved in the revision and advocacy process. I'm now at Mass Audubon, continuing to do some things on the bill at OC, but also doing some things around organizing for climate education at the local level.
And hello, everyone. I'm co-hosting this evening. My name is Eben Bine. He or they pronouns are great. I'm the Massachusetts Field and Education Manager for Our Climate, which is the organization where I got to work with Jonathan and Sarah and Anaya and so many other young people on this work. I wanted to also, since there's some Citizens Climate Lobby people in the room, wanted to shout out and say that my first lobbying experience happened when I was 31 with Citizens Climate Lobby. When I first started doing this work, I used to be a high school biology teacher. And when students asked me, as we were starting to learn about climate change, so why aren't we doing something about this? I didn't know what to say. And I eventually left the classroom and started working in the nonprofit sector, where young people and I could work on this full time. So it's my honor to be asking some of the questions tonight. I want to go next to, and I'm starting to hint at this already, what's missing from current K through 12 education? How do you hope that the average student experience would be different if we win? Sarah, Jonathan, and Anaya, you welcome any order that you want to speak on that.
Yeah, so I think as I hinted in my introduction, I think solutions-based sort of climate education is really important. I think giving students the tools to take action on climate is why the three of us are here today, since we've been given those tools. And I think it's important that we involve youth in this like existential fight against climate change, really. And like some of those tools I think include political advocacy and include lobbying and going to the state house and writing testimony sorry, and like calling legislators' offices. But I think there's a lot more around climate solutions, and we want to make sure that students are given hope in the face of this entire crisis as well, and not only being taught about the problems.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jonathan. To add up to that, yes, solutions-based climate education is very important because, like Jonathan said, if you only focus on the problems, you can breed a lot of climate anxiety. Like the way that a lot of us tend to talk about the climate crisis kind of feeds into like a doomerism mindset. Something that is additionally important is making climate education interdisciplinary. Involving it in all subjects, not just science, where you may have experienced it first, but also English class, social studies, perhaps even math. Like there are so many ways that you can engage with climate and read about climate-based literature, read about historical climate movements. And when you integrate climate into different parts of your curriculum, you are given the tools to critically engage with the climate crisis and also be armed with the skills to fight it in your own life. Sarah, if you want to add on.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, you will hear us talk a lot tonight about what it means for climate curriculum to be interdisciplinary. That is something that I think all of us here tonight really do feel strongly about. I will also just kind of state up front so that we're all on the same page, that like interdisciplinary does include science. And so while we want more than science, we also acknowledge that in schools across the state, like even basic climate science is missing from curriculum. I have not learned environmental science thus far in high school. And so we kind of, we want to balance that also with this, like, we should be teaching about climate in other subjects. We should have a focus on justice because we know that the effects of climate change are kind of reaching beyond just these like higher temperatures and natural disasters. And we also want to, you know, center the people who are being impacted and the communities that are being impacted at the center of this all.
Just before we go to the next question, what you were saying, Sarah, about in the science classroom, as an ex-science educator, that is sort of close to my heart. And I resonate with the idea of us not skipping over science and also asking what science is for. I feel like in Massachusetts culture, we value hard sciences and math, and in a sort of reverential way that sometimes becomes where the content becomes its own purpose. And I participated in that, and don't get me wrong, I love talking about organelles and photosynthesis, and you know, like I could go to town on it. It's so interesting, and that sort of question of what are any of these subjects for, I think is part of the key of unpacking this. Because you guys were talking about, we've touched on what that might look like in science class. I'm curious if any of you guys want to like give an example of what doing this work might look like in a history class or an English class, for example?
I can give an example. So I take Spanish. Currently, I'm in AP Spanish, and we are focusing on social advocacy in Latin America. And we watched this really interesting movie called También la Lluvia, and it is about the water rights crisis in Bolivia, which doesn't sound too related to climate change, but what we learned through the process of watching this movie and also about social advocacy movements throughout Latin America is that the fight for indigenous liberation, the fight for water rights, and also the current struggles for climate are totally intertwined. One cannot exist without the other. And then when you like weave in all these different movements, you can learn so much about what goes into the fight for climate change, why people feel so strongly coming from different backgrounds. I thought that experience was really valuable, and it can happen in any class like AP Spanish.
And I just want to share a little bit about how climate can be applied in an economics classroom, for example. I know CCL has a huge focus on carbon pricing and like that whole carbon price and dividend idea. And I think without understanding economics and without understanding what raising the price of carbon will do to the economy as a whole, it's you miss a big piece of what this sort of legislation will do. And so understanding the economics behind a lot of the policies can be powerful. Additionally, economics I think is really important because not every business person or every very rich, wealthy, like oil baron per se is gonna really care about the environmental impacts about climate change. And so having both those really environmental pieces to it, but also economic incentives is going to be, I think, important when it comes to promoting a lot of people to care about climate change, and or a lot of people to at least be supporting any policies or any of the movements as it builds momentum and goes forward. And so understanding that piece of it, I think, is important.
Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to share on that question?
I mean, I think Jonathan, in sort of what you were saying first around economics and economic policy, you know, I think high schoolers as a whole need to have a better understanding of public policy, and of how like that is a core tenet of how our society is shaped. And you know, I have learned everything that I know about public policy from like doing this work, not from school. I think that we can view climate as a great example to teach about things like policy, like legislation, like civic engagement. You know, we don't have to be teaching specifically climate. Like climate connects to many of the other things that folks are already learning in, you know, their US history class or in their comparative government class.
This is awesome. So I forgot to mention in the intro that I am a 20-year educator and a school librarian, and I just love all the talk of interdisciplinary work and anything involving research. And so I'm really excited to hear all the ways that you envision climate justice being taught in Massachusetts schools in the future. Sarah's touched on this a little bit already, but this bill is specifically climate justice, not just climate education, but climate justice education. And we know that last session, the committee cut out elements of climate justice in your original bill, and this year you all added it back in. So I'd love to hear from each of you what exactly climate justice means to you and why it's so important.
Oh, well, first of all, I think it's really important that we learn about, like Sarah mentioned, the disproportionate impact of climate change upon certain communities. And this is at the intersection of different systems. Like, for example, we talk about environmental justice communities a lot, environmental justice identities, and these are affected by intersections of class, of race, of gender, also of like language access, and all these different things impact like the way that you can experience climate change firsthand. I am lucky that I grew up in a town, I'm from Brookline, that I have good access to air quality, and that my respiratory health is like not at risk because I live in an environment with good air quality, but we cannot say the same for all neighborhoods in Massachusetts. So it's important that we acknowledge that not everybody's going to experience climate change the same, and we also have to learn about those effects as well.
Yeah, those are some great points, Anaya, and I just want to add that I feel like people should understand that climate change is a great wrong. It's inherently, I feel like, one of the greatest injustices of the 21st century, and it shouldn't feel like something that's going on, or something that should be in the back of anyone's minds, but just the fact that it's so wrong, and it shouldn't sit right with you to understand that the climate is changing because of the fossil fuel industry, or the people that are overdeveloping and logging, and like cutting down trees in order to develop lands. And I think overall this greed to really like develop economically and bolster one's own power and money is inherently something that's affected everyone, and we should understand just how wrong that idea is. And I think that should be a really big takeaway when it comes from when you step out of the classroom, is just how wrong climate change is.
Yeah, truer words not spoken. I think too that climate justice is also about the process surrounding this curriculum. And so what I mean by that, it's about making sure that we have funding to dedicate to the implementation of this curriculum, so that, you know, districts across Massachusetts have support in teaching this, and it's not, you know, our poor Black and brown districts that like don't have the resources to teach this curriculum. And also sort of making sure that, you know, we have implementation. We're hearing from students, from teachers, from people in environmental justice communities as we like figure out the specifics of what should go into this curriculum. And we can talk a little bit more sort of about the mechanics of that when we dive into some of the bills more specifically.
Awesome. Just before we go on, let me just say, like, so key that this bill include funding for teacher training and for teacher, you know, professional development and all those kinds of things, and that it's not just a mandate that this happen a certain way, but that it really have something behind it to help teachers learn how to do this the right way, because that will make a really big difference in the actual implementation. That's awesome. Evan, did you want to ask that next question?
Yeah, actually, and just before moving on from this topic, I want to name that in the organizing spaces that have helped to write this, systems of oppression are present and shape how we work. And I'm so grateful for how much the young people and I are constantly trying to check ourselves and become aware of the different ways that we're participating in systems of oppression, and questioning that and unpacking that at every single level. And we live in racist, classist society, like under capitalism, right? Like that's like, it's sort of baked into what we do. And so, and because of that, there are certain demographics, certain kinds of privilege that are able to access the work that we do. And I say this as somebody who went to the same public school as Sarah, which is one of the most highest performing public schools in the state, and who also like did my graduate and master's program at private elite institution. And I feel the need to name that because a lot of the students who are able to get to our organizing spaces fast often have race privilege, class privilege, and education privilege. And that's the other part of climate justice education, means that we need schools to be supporting everybody to have access to the process and the knowledge. So I just want to underscore that point that you were making, Sarah. And just before I ask the next question, is there anything in hearing that any of the three of you wanted to add, or shall we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I think we can move on. And then should we be answering chat questions through the chat, or can we just speak to them as we're answering questions, and then
well, that actually, the question in the chat really tees up the question that I was going to ask. So maybe I'll put that out there, and we can see, Henry, if this ends up answering your question as well, which is right now there are several bills that are before the Massachusetts Committee on Education. What are their differences, and what are the key elements that we're hoping we can get across the finish line this year?
So there are currently 5 bills, I think, in the legislature that concern climate education and that we have been paying attention to. And I think that, well, the main difference with our bill is that it is youth written. Just putting that out there. Youth written, youth advocated for. And our bill also, like we talked about in the previous question, contains more on environmental justice, both in the content and the implementation of our bill, like Sarah noted. We also focus on the interdisciplinary aspect. Some issues, or not issues, but traits that we've noticed with the other bills is that they are tend to focus on like the climate science aspect of climate education, which we noted is needed, does not exist in a lot of schools, but we would like to expand this to all our core subjects. And additionally, we try to involve more voices in the curriculum decisions through a committee that includes students, teachers, administration, not just people who happen to work for DESE.
Awesome. Thanks, Anaya. Yeah, so that's, I think, like an amazing summary of our bill. As Anaya mentioned, there are like couple of other things that are floating around in the Committee of Education right now, including a bill that was filed by Representative Dom. She's the rep for Amherst, that sets up a clear funding mechanism for how we actually like will devote money to this. Currently in our bill, the budgeting process within the Massachusetts legislature is very complicated. And so sometimes there are like funds that get passed as bills, but a lot of the time it's like there's this separate budget process where you have to submit amendments to the state budget, and it's like a whole thing. So the short of that is that we think that a lot of the language from Dom's bill is really great, particularly kind of this clear grant funding fund that will be like make money available to schools to actually kind of develop plans to implement this. And so that is like an aspect that we really want to make sure gets to the finish line in what's called an omnibus bill, which essentially means that the committee will look at all of the bills relating to climate education and likely combine them into one thing that hopefully they will vote favorably out of committee. And so we sort of are hoping to have some influence in kind of helping the committee to put the puzzle pieces together into this omnibus bill.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight one of the last pieces of those puzzle, or the last pieces of the puzzle that we're hoping is part of this big omnibus bill as well, which are three different identical bills that are before the Education Committee right now, and they include language from legislation that we submitted in last year's legislative session. And unfortunately, many of the clauses that we wrote were cut out by the Ways and Means Committee. And so it's definitely saddened us to see this. We were upset at the lack of transparency by the committee. They cut this language without letting us know, or without us really like finding out directly from them, which was definitely a challenge. And but I think the thing about these bills is that they have momentum. They passed out of the committee, and a lot of representatives and senators seem to be on board with the idea of climate education in general. And so I think the ideas surrounding this is that whatever ends up passing, or really, like, no matter, I guess, like the language that passes the Education Committee, this is language that we can build off of and continue to fight with, as long as we set up a foundation of strong, or not even strong, but just climate education in general, and really like set the precedent with this legislation. Additionally, I think Sarah mentioned a lot about what we're trying to do with this omnibus legislation, and we're hoping to meet with Senator Lewis, who is the chairman of the Education Committee, in next week, actually, to talk about how he can, or how we can work together with the legislators in order to make climate education and interdisciplinary climate education a priority for the Education Committee.
Awesome. So you already started to touch on the next question here, but I know some of you, were all three of you there at the hearing? Yes. Okay. So we'd love to hear what that was like, what happened at the hearing, what it was like, if that was your first time speaking before a legislative body like that. And you already started to touch on recent meetings and plans for meetings with legislatures, but if you'd like to expand on any meeting with the members of the legislature as well. Love to hear about all of that.
Yeah, so on October 10th, there was a hearing for the Education Committee that all three of us testified for in person, in addition to a couple other youth leaders who worked closely on this bill. Speaking personally, this was my second time testifying. I'd also testified for another one of the policy principle priority bills of the Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition. I can dive into that a bit more later about air quality. Actually, I just testified yesterday about another one of our bills called the Zero Carbon Renovation Fund. But yeah, it was a really interesting experience. And my favorite part was making the rounds in the legislature afterwards, talking to our own legislators and also the office of Chair Lewis of the Education Committee that Jonathan mentioned. So I met my legislator, Representative Vitolo, and we had a really interesting meeting, got to hear his perspective. And our main takeaway was that, like, we should take our wins, and we should also let the legislature enjoy working with us while we're trying to get this bill through committee. So that means that maybe we won't get our ultimate vision across the finish line. Maybe some parts of it won't make it when we try to get parts of our bill into an omnibus bill. But like at the end of the day, we are getting a win by working on climate education, trying to get something passed that sets a framework for later bills. But that was his perspective, at least. And I think it's a good thing to hold on to while we still prioritize our ultimate vision of climate education, but also try to accept those smaller wins along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Anaya, about the Vitolo meeting and about your experience with your testimony. I don't have quite as much testimony experience as you. That time testifying in front of the Education Committee was my first time testifying, and it's been my only time testifying since, but I definitely hope to continue to be involved in that process. I think one thing that I was really surprised about was just how I think receptive Chairman Lewis was. I had expected, or a lot of legislators, I think the rep or their like the ooh, I totally lost the word, but I feel like my impression of most legislators is that they kind of wave youth off, and they're sort of dismissive of our ideas sometimes, and like a lot of the times we only get to meet with their staffers during lobby meetings. But I think what really impressed me with Chairman Lewis is that he really was listening to us. He probably has to sit in that room listening to a lot of people speak on many different education bill topics, and I think he still really gave his full attention to us. And that receptivity and that willingness to listen to youth on our priorities is what gives me, I think, a lot of confidence working with him in the future. I also, yeah, I want to give Sara a chance to talk about her experience as well, but I also really did enjoy going around and talking to our legislators as well. I had as I went around, I set up a meeting with my own representative, Alice Peisch, and she used to be the chair of the education committee. So I think there will be a lot of insight that we can gain from meeting with her. Yeah.
Awesome. I feel like Anaya and Jonathan, you covered very well, like most of our kind of general strategy, and sort of what has come out of this hearing. On kind of a personal note, this was my first time testifying. It was really cool. Like it's very cool just to be able to walk up to the people who create our laws and be like, for 2 minutes, this is what I think you should do. I will say, and this is a point that I don't really want to have to make, that I'm going to anyway. I took a day off of school to come to the hearing, and it was great. And the hearing was on, I think, a Wednesday maybe. And I got back to school on Thursday and was just like swamped for the next, week, just from missing that one day of school, junior year, when like workload is really crazy. And so I think, and this sort of harkens back a little bit to what Eben, you were touching on about how, like systems of power interact. I am lucky enough to be able to manage like missing that day of school and getting to the State House. But I think like particularly for educators that are on the call, like it's really important for us to think about how we can support our students in like accessing advocacy and accessing these systems, when oftentimes school is sort of the very thing that is like preventing us from actually being able to do that and advocate for our own education.
I think that is such an incredible point, Sara. And the civics requirements in Massachusetts, you have to do like a civics project in middle school, and you're supposed to do a civics project in high school. And I can't think of a better civics project than like what three of you have been working on. It's like actually advocating for legislation that you really personally care about, and going through, even if you went as far as writing a letter to your legislator. I mean, I think that's something that every student should have an experience of, but to go to a hearing, to testify at a hearing, and yes, this should be accessible for more students.
I want to bring in a question from the chat, which I think is important to talk about, mentioning engaging students and educators from environmental justice communities in the work on this legislation. I personally want to not oversell what we were able to accomplish in doing this work, and say that engaging with state level policy is really hard for people who have thousands of fires to put out every day. And that's true of all teachers. And the dial is turned up even higher in environmental justice communities. That said, in engaging with teachers from Boston Teachers Union, there are lots of environmental justice communities with schools that are served by the BTU. And within our own organizations in the Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition, we would often take special note when feedback is coming from one of our members who is low income, one of our members who is Black or brown, one of our members who has English isolation as like part of their family experience. So anyway, yeah, I just wanted to provide some of that context that they're like, we can point to individuals, and this was a like doing the best that we can, which is part of why we say in the actual bill that the sort of implementation of like what would the projects look like, what should the standards say, we want to require DESE to support DESE, sorry, that's the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, for those of you who aren't familiar, to support teachers from all districts to participate in that implementation, because we were only able to get so far in our executing of it. Is there anything else, Sarah, Jonathan, or Anaya, you want to say on that point before we move to the next question?
I think you put that really well, Evan.
So I think a lot of us would love to hear, like, what are the next steps for this bill? And in particular, I'd love to know more about how youth who've never heard of the Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition can get involved, and how can they support your efforts, and how can adults as well support your efforts?
You asked at the perfect time, because just this Sunday, we held our very first in-person summit for the Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition. We held it in Boston at the MIT Status Center. It was a blast. It was pretty awesome. I love getting all of our organizations, both youth and our adult allies, also our adult allies who collaborate on policy campaigns with us, whether that be the Ed Bill or another polluters pay campaign. Also, yes, so I think those were our two main campaigns that were at the summit. It was great having us all come together and learn about what we were all doing, how to get involved in each other's organizations, what cool projects we were all working on. And yeah, so the Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition is a diverse group of 20 plus youth climate organizations and adult supporter allies. We are continuing to grow. We have youth that join organizations that are part of MYC or have their organizations join MYC. And we collaborate on many projects, like our policy projects, but also our yearly lobby week at the State House, and also separate events like that on Sunday, so we can all learn about what we're up to in the youth climate movement in Massachusetts. I can pass it off to Sarah and Jonathan to talk more about lobby week and some of the other campaigns we work on.
And Sarah and Jonathan, just before you go, I want to link this with a question I was direct messaged in the chat by Curran Healy, who's a middle schooler listening with high school sister. What Anaya was just talking about is a perfect example, I think. By the way, Curran's question was about the most impactful action an individual or a high school club could take on climate change. This is such a long haul project. This is our lifetimes and lifetimes beyond trying to build climate justice. And so to me, that means the first thing we need to work on is relationships, and relationships are built in coalitions. And so, Curran and co, if you guys want to join the Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition, you should totally do that. I'm going to quickly show a visual that we often show. Let me just share my screen really quick. the Massachusetts climate movement is a huge, crazy web. And there are a million different organizations that are working on this stuff, of which, like, say, here's Climate Reality, yay, is one of them. So we're all on here, and we become most powerful when we are working in groups. And so the Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition is one of the big nodes that our climate, here's our climate right here, is helping to host. And so, yeah, for Curran and Co, joining the Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition is a beautiful thing. For adults who are listening to the call, Citizens Climate Lobby is not currently a supporter of the Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition, so that could be a thing you could help with. You can help Curran, supporting Curran's club to join and participate, helping Citizens Climate Lobby to get into Mass Power Forward, which is one of the largest adult-led coalitions in the state, are beautiful things. So anyway, sorry for that tangent. I will now pass back to Sarah or Jonathan.
Yeah, I can jump in. So I think, like, and as you're hearing, there are a lot of different avenues of ways to get involved, and the climate movement is a beautiful web of people and things and actions that are all kind of happening simultaneously. So I think I'll just kind of touch on a couple of the threads and then pass it forward. So we have, as Anaya mentioned earlier, we have Lobby Week, that is an annual event in February, where young people gather at the State House to advocate for, this whole sleuth of Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition policy priorities, including this bill around education. So that is like a great way for folks to get involved in lobbying. I also will say, pivoting just for one moment from the state level things, that I, right now at Mass Audubon, am helping to front load this new coalition called the Climate Resilient Schools Coalition, that is around trying to build a larger base of people across the state who are advocating for climate curriculum in their own school districts. And so basically, we see kind of these school district, school board resolutions, pieces of local policy, as a way that students and teachers can, like, get these changes happening fast, kind of like, or faster than the legislature will in their own communities. And then also that ties into this larger state effort of legislation, and that when legislators and when the governor's office see that, like, we have all of these towns and cities that are doing things, that is gonna also give them more push to pass legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah is talking about a lot of great things with grassroots organizing and working to support climate education in our towns. I think a lot of what I've heard lobbying at the federal and state level is that local change can be the most immediate and the most powerful a lot of the time. And so, like, putting a lot of emphasis in your local communities is very important. And organizations like or coalitions like Mike and Our Climate and organizations like Our Climate have resources to support that kind of change, as well as, of course, Sarah's mentioning of the climate resilience schools network as well. Sorry about that. It's a little bit of a fumble. And then I think additionally, touching on the question of how adults can get involved, I think it's really important that we work together, because this is a very intergenerational problem, and I think it really needs intergenerational action. I think Sarah hinted at this, and Evan mentioned this, but a lot of the time youth have to spend a lot of time just focusing on school, and it ties back into that idea of those systems of oppression, and that our voices can't be involved in this process as actively as we'd like them to be. And I know some members of this call are retired and have a lot of time on their hands. So I think this idea of just being active members of the community, whether that's through phone banking events or getting petitions or building local support in any way that you can, is really important as something that that you can do during the day, and make some phone calls during the day, because a lot of the time we do have to focus on school and college apps and all of that. So it's definitely a process that requires a lot of work, I think, on our end, and a lot of organizational and administrative work, and we've been very lucky to have Evan with us and guiding us. But I think he mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but there is also room for more adults leads in our climate, and more leads in Mike as well. And so really, like, any adults that are involved in this really movements are very welcome to guide us and join us.
I want to not look away from a good, challenging question that came up in the chat a little while ago about concerns around an ed bill being, yet again, turning to our teachers to ask them to fix a social problem that the rest of society can't fix when they are already stretched so thin. And the question was also asking about, like, what generally have teachers thought about these bills? And I want to first send that question to Sarah, who I know resolved tons and tons of comments as we were writing the bill from teachers, and then welcome others to speak to that as well. And then I might share a bit.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I definitely have like worked pretty closely with teachers, and as well with the two major teachers unions in Massachusetts. We, I think, like, see them as key partners in this work. I would say that overall, at least the teachers that we have been working with, who granted like are coming to us because they're interested in climate, right? Are supportive. I think feel that if there is funding and kind of supports around this, that like this will be manageable. I also will say, you know, I think curriculum is one piece of a larger vision about kind of that places our schools as like hubs of resilience in the face of climate change, and in the face of, you know, like both like people being anxious about the crisis and us needing to have solutions, and also the very real, like, we are now having all of these natural disasters, and like how do our schools fit into that equation? So I think that and I'm like rambling a little bit here to answer your question, but I think that, you know, teachers and schools do have such a profound place in this crisis and in this conversation, because schools are where our largest communities of young people exist. And we know that in a lot of ways, they are at the center of this crisis. So I will pass it. I will stop rambling, and I will pass it to Jonathan or Anaya if you guys have more to add.
I think you put it really well, and I think in general, just this idea of an unfunded mandate is not something that we want for teachers, and we want to make sure that teachers have the resources and the support that they need in order to be able to feel comfortable teaching feel comfortable teaching climate in the classrooms. I was presenting about climate education to some like national teachers unions as well, and I think there's definitely also things that everyone can learn from other states and success stories that have already been implemented, or climate education that's already been implemented in other states. I remember this one teacher from Chicago was talking about how in music classrooms they were learning about noise pollution and how that relates to climate and how that relates to just environmental challenges in general. And so I'm sure like there's this, or I know there's this like huge network of teachers that have already been teaching climate in classrooms and are and have been teaching it in a very interdisciplinary, solutions focused, justice including manner. And there's a lot to learn from the precedent that's been set already.
Yeah, Sarah and Jonathan said very well, said everything that was on my mind. So thanks for your words.
I think I'll add really quick that I do think about what we might say no to in order to say yes to climate change. Just like we might want to say no to some things in order to be able to say yes to racial justice or to mental health or to all sorts of other things that we are realizing, we might have originally framed as in the way of real learning, that I think we are now as a society coming to realize is the real learning. And so, yeah, I don't have an answer there, but I do want to pose that question as an ex-teacher with other teachers. Did we need to go through all of the phases of mitosis? In my bio class? I mean, I think sister chromatids are fantastic, but honestly, I think in comparison to how do you talk to your legislator about the thing that is going to be dominating the rest of your life, yeah, I think we might need to ask some challenging and realistic questions, which is tied to and standardized testing, which is part of what keeps teachers locked into, and I know kept me locked into being very strict around and protective around the subject because of how deeply that was tied to the way we say education is meaningful in the state. So I think those two things are tied. Laura, I have to admit, I haven't been tracking the chat as much because I was so interested in what they were saying. Do you have any closing questions?
I mean, there's just been wonderful advice in the chat and resources being thrown out. It's been amazing. I guess I'd love to let our youth panelists close us out if, we only have 3 minutes left, but, I'd personally love to know, as 2 juniors, 1 senior, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? Like, is this fight for climate justice, is this changing your career decisions or your future trajectory? Is this informing kind of some of your thoughts about who you are and who you're becoming? And how has this experience affected you?
Maybe Jonathan, you can go first because you're finishing up your college apps.
Or yeah, I think college applications have given me a lot of time to reflect on this question, really. And I think I can say without a doubt that climate organizing in this space really changed my life. I think I mentioned before that I really didn't know the tools to take climate action before I joined our climate, and really it's true. I had really lived all my life really caring about climate change, feeling that it was a deep problem, feeling that sense of injustice, and I never really knew what I could do about it. And so being able to go to the state house and meet legislators and write legislation, and then get feedback on it and then continue to fight for it is something that that has given me a lot of hope in the climate crisis. And I think just the mere action just the action of continuing to work with this space has taught me that this is this is something that I can do as youth, sorry, as a 17-year-old kid in Massachusetts, and that there's a lot of impact that can be made here. I think in 5 to 10 years, I think I can definitely see myself continuing to work in this space. Eben mentioned that this is going to be a really long fight and a really long journey, and I think I want to continue dedicating my time and my energy to this. I really want to go to college somewhere in Massachusetts, really, so I can continue to focus on this both at the state level and a local level. So right now, as president of my school's environmental action club, we're starting to get involved with our town legislation a lot more, and we're joining our town sustainability committee and really just being like a force for change at the town level as well. And again, I don't think that would be possible at all if I didn't build the confidence and I didn't gain the tools, the policy tools to do this kind of work without joining our climate or working with Mike. And so that it has changed my life. And I think if you're a middle schooler, you're someone that really wants to get involved in this work, it can change your life as well. So please consider joining Mike. Consider working with us, and I'm sure you'll have a great experience as well.
Thanks, Jonathan, for sharing your experiences. I want to add on, I also think that being part of the climate movement has changed my life because I joined our climate at the beginning of my sophomore year, so last year. And since then, I have gained so many experiences, so many skills, learning how to testify in front of legislators, speak to the legislature, write bills. Like, that's crazy. I never thought I'd been doing that like the summer before sophomore year. And I think the most valuable part of my experience at our climate are the connections that I've made, the friends that I've been able to work with. And I know most of the time we're seeing each other over Zoom calls, but it's great learning from people who are older than me, people who are the same age as I am and have all these amazing skills and talents to learn from. Something that I've observed being part of Mike is that there is a strong college presence in the coalition. Just on Sunday, we had a group of students drive all the way over from Amherst to learn about the climate movement. And this is definitely something I hope to carry with me as I proceed through the education system. There's so much to learn from college organizers, and also gaining those skills, like developing them as I go into college. And yeah, I do hope, I don't know about college yet. Maybe I'll stay in state, maybe I won't. But I think I've learned so much from the people here in Massachusetts. Sarah and I are both members of the of Maura Healey's Governor's Youth Council, and that's been a really cool experience. So we've done some work on climate so far, and we plan to continue that throughout the year. And I'm just excited to see where the climate movement takes me, honestly.
Oh, so I feel like I have not heard this full kind of story from you both, so that's very cool to hear. I think for me, I don't know. I think I'm a big proponent of sort of just seeing where my path takes me. I think that no matter what, I will sooner or later end up back in policy. And I don't know if that means that I'm gonna kind of go straight there and be an undergrad poli-sci major and just do that for my whole life. Because I don't know, I could see myself, going into teaching for a decade or two and then ending up back in education policy, or I don't know, going into social work and then ending up back in healthcare policy. I think that there are sort of so many careers that provide necessary grounding to really have an understanding of issues in a way that our policymakers don't currently have in a lot of places. And so, yeah, that's just something that I'm kind of excited to explore as I head off to college.
Wow, awesome. Eben, I'll give you the final word.
Oh, I don't want, you just heard it. You just heard, I mean, maybe I'll just say, isn't this the most beautiful evidence for why we need to do this in schools? This like ability to take subject matter and apply it to the most challenging and engaging and important topics of our time that actually ground us in our own survival and the thriving of future generations. Sarah, Jonathan, and I'm honored to work with you. Also, just I want to say I can stick around for 5 to 10 minutes in case there are people who have individual. Awesome. Okay, Laura, shall we officially hit the gong of where